All right. It's just your average gamer here with a rapid fire review of Cyberpunk. I decided to do something like this because my monster review, as I would like to call it, is, well, as any good monster, taken a while to vanquish. And I thought maybe, getting a little rapid fire bullet point review out would help me kind of ground myself in the larger one. So this should be, no more than 10, maybe 15-minute video where I kind of just quickly talk about the things I liked, the good, the things I didn't like, the bad, and my overall impressions of the game. It'll be light on details, but big on the flashy things you want to know, and everything here will kind of be elaborated upon in my bigger review, which should hopefully exist some point in the near future. With that, well, let's jump into it. So this is just your average rapid-fire gaming review of Cyberpunk 2077. All right, let's start off with the good, because despite its public perceptions, there is a lot of good in this game. First and foremost, the city of Night City itself, from a visual and design aesthetic perspective, it's honestly awe-inspiring to at least the first few times when you take to the city and you just see the tall mega buildings in the distance and all the lights and the neon signs and the advertisements and all these other things. It really helps suck you in to the world and into this stark city of the future. And kind of building off that, the graphics are really on PC. I should say this goes without saying. I played on PC. I know the console experience, especially the last gen experience, was problematic. But if you're on a system that can support the game, the graphics are really, really good. The environments, the details in the city, the buildings, everything, the weapons all look really, really good. The characters look really good. The lip sync, the voice acting, it all flows together really well. And overall, the Cyberpunk 2077 as a visual experience is top quality. What else is good? The gameplay, which was a bit of a surprise for me, because when you look at CD Projekt Red's history with the Witcher franchise, gameplay was always, was never its strong suit. The gameplay in The Witcher 1, is hit or miss. The gameplay in Witcher 2 and 3, while more of a consistent and reliable system, it's not turning any heads. It's like a light Dark Souls action-y kind of game with parries and dodges and all that fun stuff. It gets the job done. I enjoy it. It's got more depth than it may seem on the surface, but it's never the selling point, right? Whereas Cyberpunk, I feel like they took those criticisms to heart and really went all out with the gameplay, which is especially impressive because it's such a drastic shift from what they've done with the Witcher franchise. Instead of a third-person action sword and hack and slash kind of game, you have a first-person shooter that works surprisingly well for a team that never developed a first-person shooter before. The guns are varied and exciting. They impact well. There's a lot of diversity in how you approach your build, whether it's guns, hacks, melee weapons, or anything in between. And I really appreciate that. I do feel, at least in the kind of playthrough I did, which was a hacker, it got a little stale at the end because it was just the same thing over and over again: breach protocol, suicide, contagion, etc. But that's also, I did as much of the side stuff as I could bear towards the end of the game, and so just kind of as an average, on an average level, the gameplay rocks. The gameplay is fun. It's intuitive. There's a lot of diversity to it. And unfortunately, depending on how you look at it, I also think it's probably the best aspect of the game. Certainly, at least in comparison to its expectations, which were, for me at least, from gameplay, pretty nil. What else is good? There's definitely some good quests, some good side missions. The characters, some of them are standouts, but we're getting into a kind of a, not so much good or bad point, but it's kind of bit of both. So I'll spare the deep dive into how I feel about the characters and the story for my monster video. But for the purposes of this, it's not bad, but it's not good either. And with that, let's transition a bit to the bad. To me, one of the biggest failures of this game is the complete lack of meaningful exploration. When this game was announced, it was advertised as this incredible vertical concrete jungle you can explore, when in reality it's anything but. The game, like I said, looks amazing, but there's no depth behind it. I remember really early on after the game launched, I saw on Reddit this post. At the time, I was like, no, this can't be right, because I was still in denial about the state of the game. But it was like, Night City feels like the Truman Show. It's, looks amazing on the surface. But if you open the doors, which for the most part you can't, but if you were, there's nothing there. And there's a lot of doors that are just locked. And there's a lot of buildings that are just inaccessible. To me, the biggest example of this is how unexplorable the mega buildings are. I thought at least, okay, I didn't think every building you could go into. That would be a little insane. But at least the mega buildings, or at least your mega building, because you do get a bit, but it's so static. It's the same thing every time, and there's nothing to really discover. And there's none of that in any other buildings. You have this huge mega building with, what must be thousands of rooms, and you can explore one in a random side quest or story mission. And it's just like, why? Why was that, why was that taken? Why was that not delivered to us the way it was promised, And to build on that, there's just a total lack of things to do in the city. And, there's plenty of missions. There's plenty of, cop missions. There's plenty of fixer missions. But they're all kind of samey. And what you really need for a city, especially to feel alive, is more leisurely activities to kind of roleplay and partake in. I mean, goddamn, there's no drinking in this game aside from story moments. There's no way to customize yourself after character creation, which is, a base feature in almost any RPG that has a character creator. But in a game where you are defined by how you choose to make yourself appear, and the options of how to adjust your appearance are so vast, to not have that option is downright criminal. And I really hope it gets added in a future DLC or expansion. But yeah, there's no drinking, there's no games, there's no Gwent equivalent, there's no dice poker, there's no gambling of any kind, even though there are locations you can enter with like roulette tables and slot machines, but you can't interact with any of them. And it really makes the world feel static and stale, and it really undercuts the visual spectacle of Night City. What else is bad here as we try to wrap up this rapid fire review? I know I just said that the story's kind of in the in-between, and it is, because the writing's good, but like the story is just so short and weak, and man, I just want to dive into it right now. But I'll give you a little taste of what I'm going to dive into in my monster review. And I think the biggest problem with the story, and what brings it down, and what forces me to put it in the bad category, is it's a story that's at odds with itself. It's a story that contradicts itself, at least in comparison to what we were told it was going to be. I'm not saying the game itself contradicts itself, but going in, we're being told we're V, we're this, fresh-faced merc in Night City, and we're going to create our own story, create our own legacy. But you do none of that. V is, without going too much spoilers here, basically sidelined for Johnny. And I think Johnny, as much as I love the character and love Keanu Reeves, I think him and the focus on him in the story is what ultimately ruins it for me. All right, a couple other things before we wrap up. Soundtrack. I didn't really engage with it much because it isn't really there much. There's no soundtrack. There's no ambient soundtrack while you're exploring the city, and I can't for the life of me figure out why, because some of the best aspects of The Witcher 3 is just roaming its open world and hearing the amazing Polish Slavic masterpieces of music blasting you and serenading you and investing you in the world and immersing you in it, making you feel things. It adds character. It was to the point where I found a radio station I liked, Pacific Dreams, which I felt was this perfect kind of ambient cyberpunk vibe, but you can only listen to it in your car. And I'm like, why is there not a mod or an item I can purchase that allows me to have a radio on the go? I mean, this is a world that takes place 50 years ahead of us, and you're telling me people don't have a Bluetooth radio? I mean, goddammit, Fallout, a post-apocalyptic world, has portable radios. Like, where is this stuff? So while the music may have been good, it's so not present that I can't even really judge it, and it's a shame because they did such a good job with the soundtrack in Witcher 3. What else? We talked to music, we talked gameplay, we talked a bit of story, graphics. I mean, that kind of covers most of it. So let's just kind of wrap up this rapid fire review. Like I said, these are just the surface thoughts that I'm going to dive into in my deep dive monster review. Overall, Cyberpunk is an incomplete game. It's got, you know, it's like a house. Like, going back to the Truman Show analogy, it's a house where you have the walls and the doors and the windows, but there's nothing inside. There's nothing inside. And it just so happens that, you know, the outside of this house looks so good and is so appealing that it draws you in. But then the more time you spend there, the more you realize you're just kind of walking around the same empty house with nothing really drawing you in except for like a few highlights here and there, like the Voodoo Boys mission and a few other side quests. But it just feels so empty in comparison to The Witcher. It feels so lifeless in comparison to The Witcher. It feels so, you know, in a game like The Witcher, it's so dark and oppressive and depressing, but this one feels more so because it's so unliving. It doesn't feel lived in. The NPCs disappear on the fly. They kind of come and go. They have no rotation, no routine. You know, like the Witcher 3 NPCs weren't like mind game changing, but they at least, you know, had a place to sleep at night. They had routines they went through in the day. They reacted to weather and such. But Cyberpunk is just like, all they said is like, hey, let's just take a bunch of really cool looking diverse NPCs and just throw them in there and let them walk around and they won't notice the difference. Well, guess what? We noticed the difference. And overall, though, it's a shame because the potential was clearly there. There's so many things that you're like, why didn't that get more attention? Why is that suddenly not a thing? Like, one thing that really stands out is the life paths. They're completely inconsequential, and it's just it's just one example of the greater problem with Cyberpunk, is that ultimately it was a game that promised you a whole city that was yours for the taking. This was going to be about you and how you wanted to approach this dark future. And in the end, on top of all the, you know, missing features and lack of life in the city, that promise was a lie. The story has nothing to do with V. V, for me, stands for vessel, because he is a vessel for Johnny Silverhand and his story, and the game suffers for it. All right. I think that's where I'll wrap up this little rapid fire review. I hope I gave you a nice little taste of my thoughts on Cyberpunk, and will encourage you to trudge through my monster review when it comes out. And yeah, it's been just your average gamer here. And until next time, see ya.